We'll do a review in Likutei Sichos in Chelik Chof Ches, volume 28. This is the Sicha for Chag Hashavuos. This is a whole Lomdische Pilpul Sicha explaining where is the source for the Alter Rebbe's ruling. The Alter Rebbe rules with regards to Shavuos that the day after Shavuos, to us it's known as Isru Chag, or in the time when Shavuos was really one day, was the day after. Today it's the second day, Sveka de Yoma. So there's a halacha that you're not allowed to actually be maspid, eulogize. You're not allowed to fast today. You're not allowed to fast on that day. It's a special holiday, the day after. Even more than the Isru Chag of any other Yom Tov. What's so special about the day of after Shavuos is because since Shavuos is only one day, it's based on the Gemara, and in the Gemara there's a big machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, whether the korbanos, the Olos Re'iyah, that when you come to the Beis Hamikdash on the three holidays of Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, whether the Olos Re'iyah can be brought on Yom Tov itself, because Olos Re'iyah, since it's an oila, it gets entirely consumed on the Beis Hamikdash. Beis Shammai's opinion is, since there is no human benefit from this carbon, and the korbanos of Shavuos have tashlumim, you have 7 days to bring them till the 12th of the month, you can still bring the korbanos, and therefore you're not allowed to, according to Beis Shammai, to bring them on Shavuos itself. So when did the people bring the Olos Re'iyah? They bought it the day after Shavuos because they couldn't bring it on Shavuos alone. That's the opinion of Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel says no, it's an obligation on the day. You don't have to go to the day of Tashlumim, the makeup. You have to do it on the day, and even though it's not mamish considered some benefit to the person because it's all on the mizbeach, but because we don't want, you are going to have a good meal and the mizbeach doesn't have any korbanos, it's considered a tzorech tzas for the person to not just eat himself but also the mizbeach to have. So Beis Hillel say you could bring the korbanos even on Yom Tov, the Olos Re'iyah, even the Olos, you can bring it on Shavuos. So technically, according to Beis Hillel, the halacha is like Beis Hillel. The day after Shavuos is nothing. There's no reason to make it into a Yom Tov. But yet brings down the Alter Rebbe that Beis Hillel themselves conducted themselves like Beis Shammai, and many of the Yidden went along with it, and therefore today the halacha is that osuli is unless you can't fast. Now this point that the Alter Rebbe says that you're not allowed to fast, that on that base, Beis Hillel agreed to Beis Shammai, and the people conducted themselves like Beis Shammai, and they all waited for the next day, which means even according to Beis Hillel that you're allowed to do it on Shavuos, that an Olos Re'iyah can be brought on Shavuos, but if somebody didn't bring it or wants to push it off, they can do it too. But he says, Alter Rebbe says that they did so, L'Poel Mamash, because they didn't want to bring it, looks like, on Shavuos itself. And the question becomes, what's the source for the Alter Rebbe's ruling? He says that Beis Hillel agreed to Beis Shammai, and that's the way the Yidden did. Or there's no clear, open source for this that the Alter Rebbe brings down in the Shulchan Aruch. And the question becomes, what's the source for this? Where does the Alter Rebbe take this from? So I guess this is a whole discussion by Rabbi Zevin in the Sefer that he wrote Soifrim Usforim in Psakim on page 16. And he comes up with an idea that there's a Tosfos Serid, and that the Alter Rebbe rules like the Tosfos Serid. But the Rebbe takes this reason apart. The Rebbe does not agree, and the Rebbe explains this is going to be the whole discussion. The Rebbe is going to show another Gemara in Beya. There's going to be a lot of Gemaras and a lot of discussion about this. We'll go step by step, and Bezras Hashem will be able to understand and appreciate the tremendous depth and insight in the Rebbe's teaching of the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. Aleph, Chag Hashavuos Aleph. In Shulchan Aruch besoifun de halachas wegen Chag Hashavuos. In the Shulchan Aruch, at the end, when he talks the laws about the Shavuos Yom Tov, schreibt the Alter Rebbe writes, B'motzoi Chag HaShavuos. On Motzoi Chag HaShavuos, Osur lihis anis meikir hadin. It's prohibited to be fasting from the main halacha, which means even though there is actually a custom by regular all Isru Chag, the day that follow Yom Tov, whether it's Pesach or Sukkot, that we don't, the minhag is not to fast on the day that follows Yom Tov Isru Chag, but on Motzei Chag HaShavuos, the day after Shavuos, that is Osur lihis anes meikir hadin. It is actually from the halacha. You're not allowed to fast on the day after Shavuos. Why? Lefi shahoyo Yom Tavo'ach, because that day was called the day of shechting. What is the meaning Yom Tavo'ach? A shechting day. Everybody shechted on that day. It was a lot of korbanos, and it got the name of Yom Tavo'ach. Why did everybody shechten then? Why is it a Yom Tavo'ach? So Alter Rebbe explains. It was called a Yom Tov Bizman Shebeis Hamikdash Kayim. Now we're talking about in the Shulchan Aruch for us not to fast. We don't have a Beis Hamikdash. We don't have korbanos, but in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, this extends to us as well in the prohibition of tinies. But he's saying to us that the Alter Rebbe, because it was in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, it was a Yom Tavo'ach. It was a day of shechting. Bizman shebeis hamikdash kayim, when the Beis Hamikdash was in existence and everybody had to bring korbanos, the day after Shavuos was a day of shechting. Why? The Hainu. That is, what shechting was done on the day after Shavuos. Shaboy b'yoim hoyu makrivim Olos Re'iyah. On that day, they had offered the Olos Re'iyah. The Torah says, Loisira, as Pnei Abayel Kecha Rekom, they have to bring a korban oila when you come Shalish Ba'amim Liros to visit the Beis Hamikdash. You have to bring a korban riyah. That's called a korban riyah. An Olos Re'iyah. Olos Re'iyah means it's fully burnt on the mizbeach. So the Alter Rebbe says, "Lifshoy bizman dainu sheboy b'yoyim hoyu makrivim Olos Re'iyah shaloi hoyu yecholim lahakriv b'yom tov atzmei." They were not able to bring it on Yom Tov itself. Now notice the Alter Rebbe brings exactly the reasoning of Beis Shammai, who hold that you cannot bring, in the Mishnah, the Beis Shammai Mishnah Chagiga, they say you cannot bring the Olos Re'iyah on Yom Tov itself. You can't bring the Olos Re'iyah, and therefore, so what? How did you fulfill the mitzvah of the korban Re'iyah, the Olos Re'iyah? How do we do it? So, and what's the reason why we cannot bring an Olos Re'iyah? Because it's all on the mizbeach. Because there is no need for consumption for the person. There's nothing for the person in it. It's all burnt. So you don't desecrate the Yom Tov. You don't shecht it to desecrate the Yom Tov because there is no benefit to the person that he can eat. Ve'ein mechalim Yom Tov b'shvilom, and you do not desecrate the Yom Tov before them. The Torah says you have to bring the Olos Re'iyah. Why would that be called B'chala the Yom Tov? You're fulfilling the mitzvah of the Torah to bring an Olos Re'iyah on Yom Tov. No. So the argument is it's not actually an obligation only on that day. Kivon she'efsher la'akribam achar Yom Tov. You can bring it after Yom Tov. Now, after Yom Tov, you're going to say, we learn out, just like Pesach and Sukkot have 7 days, Shavuos is like a 1 day Yom Tov, the Torah, and still you can bring it for 7 days, Tashlumim. So, Shat Seres, Yeshlo, Tashlumim, Kol Shiva. The Shavuos you can make up for 7 days. So, since there is no need to bring it on Shavuos itself, because you can bring it after Shavuos. So we're talking not allowed to bring it on Shavuos itself because we're not allowed to be Mechal Yom Tov to bring it because there's no human benefit from bringing it on Yom Tov. It's an oila goes all on the Mizbeach. And therefore, it wasn't brought on Yom Tov. It was brought after Yom Tov. So it turns out all the people were waiting till after Yom Tov to bring their korban. That's why it's called a Yom Tavo'ach. Now, this is a great explanation. There's only one problem. That's the opinion of Beis Shammai. And of course, the halacha is always like Beis Hillel against Beis Shammai. So the Alter Rebbe continues. This is the opinion of Beis Shammai, who holds that you're not allowed to bring the Olos Re'iyah because there's no Oichel Nefesh. But according to Beis Hillel, we are allowed to bring them, offer them on Yom Tov itself. And here is the Alter Rebbe's gewaldige chiddush that we're trying to understand where he takes this from. He says, Kivon shebedover ze osu Beis Hillel kidivrehem. Since in this particular case, there's a lot of machloikis Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel disagreed with Beis Shammai and they didn't do like Beis Shammai said. But in this particular argument, Beis Hillel did like the Beis Shammai, which means, according to Beis Hillel, you're allowed to bring it on Yom Tov, but if you didn't bring it on Yom Tov, you can bring it after Yom Tov as well. So since Beis Hillel themselves did as Beis Shammai did, v'harbe Yisrael nogu k'moisam, and many of the Yidden also went along as Beis Hillel did to not bring it on Yom Tov. That's the way they did L'Poel Mamish. The minhag was not to do it on Yom Tov, but to wait till the day after Yom Tov. L'Akrivim Achar Yom Tov, to bring after Yom Tov. So therefore, there was a whole big offerings of korbanos on the day after Yom Tov. All these people, nobody brought their, or many of the people didn't bring it on Yom Tov. They all came together on the day after Yom Tov. Benaseh lahem yom zeh. So this day, the day after Yom Tov, which is Shu Motzoi Yom Tov, which is after Yom Tov, Kimo Yom Tov Atzmai. It became like a Yom Tov because everybody's bringing the korbanos. Leha'oser boy behesvet v'tainis, to prohibit it, to eulogize and to fast. It's a regular weekday technically, but because everybody brought their korbanos, it was an extension of the Shavuos holiday, and therefore it became like a Yom Tov and no eulogy and no fast day. So what does it mean to us now that we don't have korbanos? So now there is no reason, seemingly, to make it continue that Yom Tov of after Shavuos. But im kain, if so, in that case, af ato mishachora Beis Hamikdash. So also now, after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, loihutra hahespet v'hatainis b'yom, the eulogizing and fasting, just like it was usher then, Asur behesvet v'tainis, it still remains asur behesvet v'tainis b'yom. That's why the Alter Rebbe begins saying that the day after Shavuos, me'iker hadin, not just a minhag, me'iker hadin, it's asur behesvet v'tainis because of the time of the Beis Hamikdash, which it was a Yom Tavo'ach, even though Beis Hillel technically disagree that there needs to be a Yom Tavo'ach because they allowed to shecht on Shabbos, but since practically they went along with Beis Shammai, which means they did not bring their korbanos, and everybody on the second day, even Beis Hillel and many of the Yidden did like Beis Hillel, that they brought their korbanos on the day after Shavuos. It became a Yom Tov, and today we continue that Yom Tov. We don't have any korbanos, but it's also behesped v'tainis. That's the Alter Rebbe's ruling over here. And this part that the Alter Rebbe adds, that Beis Hillel did like Beis Shammai, and the people followed also like Beis Hillel, that they made this day into a Yom Tov following the view of Beis Shammai, that needs a source. We don't find the source of that. So that's the question that the Rebbe presents here, is you do a the Shaila. So the known question is, what's mefrek that people ask, Wo is der Moker as Beis Hillel sich in dem gefiert ke Beis Shammai? Where is the source that Beis Hillel conducted himself as Beis Shammai? Und haben Makri given noch Yom Tov, and that they brought after Yom Tov. Und as Harbem Yisrael nogu kemaisa. Alter Rebbe says two things. First of all, that Beis Hillel also did like Beis Shammai, and they also brought after. They didn't bring on Yom Tov, even though they said Beis Hillel you're allowed to bring the Olos Re'iyah on Yom Tov. And the second thing, that also many of the Yidden did like them. So in other words, it turned into a Yom Tavo'ach. Even Min Hadin, it didn't have to be. And it became a Yom Tov. That's what it's also asked for the Titus. Where does the Alter Rebbe take this from? So again, this is discussed by Rabbi Zevin. And the Rebbe is going to take issue with this explanation. First, the Rebbe brings down another abraisa in Gemara. So the Gemara is all the Mishnah is in Chagiga, the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. So in the Gemara over there, the Gemara brings down a brisa, and perhaps we can see from this brisa that there is something about Beis Hillel following Beis Shammai because of an incident, as we're going to learn now, and based over there, there's a commentary of the Tosfos Reed, which seems to imply that the Yidden did make it into to answer the Brisa. Let's look at the Brisa, what the Brisa says there, and perhaps we'll see if there is a hint from that. And this Tosfos Reed, this is what the Rav Zevin wants to use as an explanation, as a source for the ruling of the Alter Rebbe that Beis Hillel did like Beis Shammai, and they followed. In Gemara brings sich a Brisa. There's a Brisa brought on the Gemara. Maisa umeis Alexa. Who did Alexa exactly? There's a story. Alexa died. It's different legends. Some say Alexandria. Somebody say Alexander. But whatever, this person died. Belud. It was lived in Lud. He died over there in Lud. So v'nichnesu kol Yisrael l'seitei. So all Yidden came in to eulogize him. Apparently, he was a important person that the Yidden wanted to eulogize him. V'loi hinicham Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon said, no, today you can't eulogize. No eulogies today. What's today? Why didn't he let them? Mipnei shel Yom Tov shel Atzeres. This was Shavuos. It was Yom Tov of Atzeres. Atzeres ti lachem, which is Shavuos. You can't eulogize. On Yom Tov, you're not allowed to eulogize. So they wanted to eulogize him on Shavuos. So Rabbi Tarfon says, no, can't. The Gemara questions this statement. How could it possibly be that the Yidden came to eulogize on Shavuos? It's not a question about Shavuos. Shavuos, you're not allowed to eulogize. Yom Tov. Why would everybody want to come to eulogize? So the Gemara corrects it. Frag the Gemara, Yom Tov sal kadaitoch. Does it really enter your mind that he told them that this is Yom Tov of Atzeres, and that's the reason you can't eulogize because it's Yom Tov? Could that possibly be that this is what he told them? How would the Yidden even have a thought to come to eulogize? They needed Rabbi Tarfon to tell them not to eulogize. The Gemara corrects and says Rabbi Tarfon is not because it was Yom Tov. It was the day after Yom Tov. Frag die Gemara Yom Tov sal kadaitoch. Und antwort, what does the Gemara answer? Elo eimo bipnei sheyem Tavo'ach hoye. This day was the day that was after Yom Tov. It was that day Tavo'ach. Yom Tavo'ach is the name. The day of Shechting is the name of after the day after Shavuos. The Isra Chag of Shavuos is Yom Tavo'ach because that's when everybody brought their korbanos. So what Rabbi Tarfon said, not because of a Yom Tov Atzeres, it was Yom Tavo'ach was day, and still he didn't let them. Okay. Question is, why would Rabbi Tarfon only in two cases the Mishnah in Bracha says that he once ruled, he almost, because he did ruled like the Rabbi Tarfon, like against the Chachamim. Why would like Beis Shammai against Beis Hillel? We don't find, besides two places, the Gemara says that in which in Yerushalmi, Shvi's Rebbe brings, in which Rabbi Tarfon ruled like Beis Shammai against Beis Hillel. Why does Rabbi Tarfon say that you can't eulogize because it's Yom Tavo'ach? It's not a Yom Tavo'ach according to Beis Hillel. That's only Beis Shammai. So it's not logical to say as Rabbi Tarfon zol ma'atzmai paskin of Beis Shammai. You should say on his own. He says like Beis Shammai, and he says, and no, we can't eulogize to them. And he says like Beis Shammai, and they all followed him. That was the ruling. Und kol Yisrael zol noch maskim sein mit seinem psak, and they listened, and they listened his ruling. Doesn't really fit for Rabbi Tarfon to rule like Beis Shammai that it's a Yom Tavo'ach, and Beis Hillel doesn't hold ein Yom Tavo'ach. There's no Yom Tavo'ach according to them because you can bring in a Yom Tov. So why would Rabbi Tarfon rule on his own? That doesn't fit. It's not logical. Is there foot move on? So from this you understand. As kol Yisrael haben früher ma'atzmam sich geführt in dem kedivre Beis Shammai. So it's understood when Beis Shammai said, no, don't do it, and they agreed to it because this was like a tradition at that time, that they conducted themselves like Beis Shammai. So that would be a source for the Alter Rebbe, it would seem, that the Shabbos, Rabbi Tarfon says, you don't fast on, you don't eulogize. They wanted to eulogize Alaksa on the Yom Tavo'ach, on the day after Shavuos. He says, no, you can't do that. There's a simon that must have been an accepted custom, like to follow Beis Shammai, even though Beis Hillel disagrees. So we have to say that was the tradition. The question is, but still, how could we rule? How could we rule like Beis Shammai against Beis Hillel? Why did the people conduct themselves? It's the Mishnah says beferish over there that Beis Hillel say that there's no such a thing as a Yom Tavo'ach unless if Shavuos is on Shabbos, over there it doesn't override the Shabbos, then after Shavuos it's a Yom Tavo'ach, because on Shabbos you're not allowed to bring the korban oila. Even Beis Hillel agrees to that. But if it's on any other day, or in the Mishnah it talks about Erev Shabbos or any other day that Rebbe points out in the order, it doesn't make a difference. There's no Yom Tavo'ach. Why would there be a Yom Tavo'ach? So Ba'afal Pi, as in der Mishnah Retzich Meforish, even though what the Mishnah talks very clearly, Wegen Atzeres Shachali is better Shabbos when Shavuos comes on Friday, which means as long as it's not on Shabbos itself. If it's on Friday, it says Beferish, Beishamai Oimrim Yom Tavuach Achara Shabbos. He would say Beishamai, because you can't bring on Shavuos on Friday. You can't bring the next day, which would make it the normal Yom Tavuach the day after, because it's Shabbos. So he says Yom Tavuach Achara Shabbos, after Shabbos. Beis Hillel says in the Mishnah, Ein Yom Tavo'ach Achara Shabbos. There's no Yom Tavo'ach after Shabbos because you bring it on Friday. Only if it's on Shabbos itself would Beis Hillel agree that the Yom Tavo'ach is after Shavuos. But here, if it's on Friday or any other day of the week, you could bring it on that day. As Oibat Seres is nit Chal b'Shabbos, that when Shavuos does not come out on Shabbos, darf man nit kein Yom Tavo'ach. You don't need a Yom Tavo'ach. Weil we can makriv sein in Tag von Yom Tov. Because you can bring a der Yom Tov. So how could you say that everybody's paskening like that? The minhag was to do it like Beis Shammai. And why would they conduct like that? What's the explanation? So there is an explanation of the Toysus Rid. Bavor the Toysus Rid. The Toysus Rid answers this. The Shaila. He says like this: Koshali. It's hard to be to understand. In Cain, Rabbi Tarfon ki Beis Shammai. Then it means Rabbi Tarfon ruled like Beis Shammai. The Beis Hillel, ha'amru de'ein lo yom tavuach the mekarvi b'yom tov. They say there's no such a thing as a yom tavuach because you bring it on yom tov. Und entfert, and what he answers is, Beis Hillel ain't tzorich yom tavuach. Hitaka doesn't need a yom tavuach. You could shecht it on that day. That's the halach. Mihu, nevertheless, Stama de Milsa ein kol Yisrael yichelim lahaspik. But the fact is, there are so many Yidden to bring the korbanos on Shavuos. Not all Yidden were able to fit in, to get a chance to lahakriv shalmei chagiga v'olos re'iyah, to do the shlomim of the chagiga and the Olos Re'iyah. You had to bring, in addition to the Olos Re'iyah, there was also shlomim, the festival shlomim. That's they ate the shlomim of the chagiga. But there's not enough time for everybody to the Yom Rishon. And v'harbe makrim b'yom sheni. So the practical fact was that many would bring on the second day. Hilkach, and therefore, because all of these korbanos, they had to push it off. Yom Sheni Shalatzeres who also behes with the tinus. It's also behes with the tinus. And that's why they didn't allow to eulogize Rabbi Tarfon. It became a day of shechting, not because you can't do it, but as a practical matter, it became the Yom Tavo'ach. The main offering is on the second day. So he explains that the reason is not because we're ruling like Beis Shammai against Beis Hillel, but the practical fact is that the people couldn't all get to do it on the first day on Yom Tov itself, so they pushed it off to the second day, and many people did it, and it became a day that's also Be'esrei B'Tanya. So based on this, wants to explain that's the source of the Alter Rebbe. Based on this, we explain and reasoning for the words of the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. As those was zogt as bepoil Isru Chag von Atzeres given Yom Tavo'ach. The fact that he says actually that Isru Chag, the day after Shavuos, becomes of Atzeres, becomes a Yom Tavo'ach. He says behesem. This fits Valpi Divrei HaTosos Rida. Now, based on the words of the Tosos Rida that we mentioned, that the fact was that it became a Yom Tavo'ach, not because you were not allowed to. So that's the way they want to explain the reason for the Alter Rebbe, that because the Gemara says Rabbi Tarfon didn't let them eulogize, and there has to be, that must have been a good reason for their conduct, and the explanation is based on the Tosos Rib, because practically speaking, it was impossible for everybody to bring the korbanos, and therefore they brought it on the next day. It became a Yom Tavo'ach, that it's also behes for B'tani. That's why they want. That's the explanation that Reb Zevin wants to give for the Alter Rebbe's source. But the Rebbe will say, when you look into the words of the Alter Rebbe, you will see clearly that this is not really what the Alter Rebbe had in mind, and there's altogether a different interpretation, as we will see in the following seif. The Rebbe is going to point to the fact that the Alter Rebbe is different than what the Tosos Reid says, and we will still need to find another source, which the Rebbe is going to find. Ois base. So the Rebbe says, so there's a fundamental difference the way it's written in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch and the Tosos Reid. The Tosos Reid explains because of a practical reasons it wasn't possible, or it was done because it was too much to do on the first day Yom Tov. But in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, you see the Alter Rebbe goes into the reasoning like Beis Shammai, that they couldn't bring it. They couldn't bring it because you're not allowed to bring it, which is the opinion of Beis Shammai, not because it is not practical. Let's look inside. Beis says Ober Klal Nit Mistaber. It's totally not logical, as midverted badover ze also Beis Hillel k'divreihem, that in this matter Beis Hillel did like their words. They do like their words. The practical also k'divreihem is that Alter Rebbe oisen svoros harid. Alter Rebbe has in mind the idea of the read because they couldn't get to it on the first day. That's what he means. In Ein Kol Yisrael Yichel Lahaspik. He says they didn't have a chance to. The Alter Rebbe says they did like Beis Shammai, not they couldn't, like the Reed said, because they didn't get a chance. Der Loshon von Admur Hazokin hot nit in sich as a hesber. The language the Alter Rebbe uses doesn't have this explanation. And furthermore, the Rebbe sagt, na viele von dem was der Alter Rebbe sagt, even from the fact that the Alter Rebbe says, "V'harbe mi Yisrael nogu k'moisum lakrim machayomtiv," he says that many of the Yidden conducted like them. It doesn't say the fact was, it's not a conduct. If, like they read, they didn't get a chance to do it on Yom Tov, they did it after Yom Tov, but the Alter Rebbe uses the Lashon that many of the Yidden conducted themselves like Beis Shammai, lakrim machayomtiv, is oich muchach. It's also evident as meint nicht dem Inyan was steht in Tosos Reid. The Alter Rebbe doesn't mean the idea that Tosos Reid talks about that they didn't practically able to do it. That's not what he said. He says they conducted themselves like Beis Shammai, not they didn't get a chance. Was is mashma neu gewen. Warum demult wollte der Alter Rebbe gesagt, if the Alter Rebbe meant what the Reed said, nicht nogu kamoisum lakrim machayomtiv, not they conducted themselves like Beis Shammai to bring it after Yom Tov, was is mashma That's mashma. That was their custom to begin with. The Beis Shammai, that they were doing like Beis Shammai, is nor it's a minhag that they had to do it. That would be the lashon. The Alter Rebbe says, "V'harbe Yisrael." That's what he should have said, like they read, "V'harbe Yisrael shlo yispiku la'akriv b'Yom Tov." Many of the Yidden who didn't get a chance to bring it on Yom Tov, nogu la'akriv macha Yom Tov, had the minhag to bring up to Yom Tov. Ukiyotze were similar to this. Alter Rebbe says that they followed. This was a minhag. Toshas Reed is saying they didn't get a chance to. So they ended up doing it on the second day. The Alter Rebbe says the Lashon, they conducted like them, that this is what they did to begin with. So the Rebbe, in the Lashon of the Alter Rebbe, doesn't fit. But even more than all this, another reason, the reasoning that the Rid gives is not specifically negeya to only the Olos Re'iyah. The Toshas Rid mentions whether it was the Olos Re'iyah, the Olos Chagiga. He's trying to tell us how busy they were at that time. It was a busy time. So the fact that the Alter Rebbe makes no mention of the Olos Chagiga, the Shalmi Chagiga, it means that he's only concerned with the Olos Re'iyah, not to do that on Yom Tov, not because there was no time, because or else he would have mentioned the Olos Re'iyah and the Olos Chagiga. And another thing, and main thing is, for them was the Alter Rebbe der Mond, nor Olos Re'iyah. The Alter Rebbe mentions only Olos Re'iyah. Sheboy b'yoyim hoyu makrivim Olos Re'iyah. They would bring the Olos Re'iyah. According to the Toshuri, they brought both the Olos Re'iyah and the Chagiga. It's not because the Olos Re'iyah you can't bring on Shavuos, because Beis Hillel says you could. They didn't have a chance, so they did both. But the Alter Rebbe says clearly only Olos Re'iyah. Not as quoted in the Toshus Re'iyah, he mentions also Shalmi Chagiga. Number one, and he goes into great length the reason why they didn't bring the Olos Re'iyah like Beis Shammai. That reasoning only applies to Olos Re'iyah that doesn't have a part of Eichel Nefesh that would not apply to the Shalmi Chagiga. So you see, the Alter Rebbe is not talking about because they couldn't, because they were busy, which is applicable to the Shalmi Chagiga as well. It has to do with the prohibition that the Shammai says you can't bring Olos Re'iyah. That Alter Rebbe writes. The Olos Re'iyah, they weren't able to bring on Yom Tov itself. Because there's no need for human consumption, so they're not allowed to do it on Yom Tov. That's the issue, and that's what they brought the next day. And the Alter Rebbe says this is what the people did, like Beis Shammai. So it's evident, it's not for this new reason because they didn't get a chance. It's muchach. It's evident when the Alter Rebbe says that this is they did in this matter, like the words of Beis Shammai, many didn't went along and did so as well. It's not because all Yidden are not have a chance to bring the korban. But that would be also by Shalmi Chagiga, they didn't have a chance to, and they brought it over then. That's not why the Alter Rebbe says they did it the next day. They did it the next day because you can't bring Olos Re'iyah on Yom Tov. That's what the Alter Rebbe says. So Nors is verbunden mit dem Tam from Beis Shammai, welche ist shaykh nor bei Olos Re'iyah. But this is connected to the reasoning of Beis Shammai that says you're not allowed to bring it on Yom Tov. And the Beis Hillel did like Beis Shammai in this case, which only applies to Olos Re'iyah. And that's the reason why Noga Kamoisom. The question is, what's the source? Now, before the Rebbe comes back to the question, what's the source, the Rebbe explains why the Alter Rebbe doesn't want to learn like the Toshus Re'iyah. Why can't the Alter Rebbe say? The reason is because they didn't get a chance. So first of all, the Alter Rebbe says that wouldn't be a reason that some Yidden didn't get a chance to bring it on the first day to make it for all Yidden Yom Tavo'ach. The Rebbe said we can say, as the time for was the Alter Rebbe nimmt nicht on the Hasbore, the Toysus Harid. Why does he not accept the Toysus Harid logic? When Isur has to the time of Motzei Chag Hashavuos about the prohibition of eulogizing a tinus because many people brought them, not because of Beis Shammai's svara, but because they didn't get a chance. Is it's difficult to say asuli di welche ein yuchel lahaspi v'lahakriv. Those who don't have an opportunity to get a chance to bring the korban b'yom rishon, so there's some that couldn't. So the Yom Shein haben them together for Yom Tavo'ach. These hesped v'tainis. That's why the second day following Yom Tov should be defined as a Yom Tavo'ach, that you can't fast, you can't eulogize and fast in there because some didn't get a chance. For Ali, for all, this doesn't really fit. That's one logical reason. Besides that, the Rebbe said the reasoning itself that you didn't get a chance is also something that needs to be explained, because we find like Erev Pesach, all Yidden needed to bring a korban Pesach, and yet they all Erev Pesach, and all Yidden managed to have the korban in time. Oich der Tam Atzmei, the Rebbe says, as Enkol Yisrael Yuchelim Lahasmik Ulahakriv, Shalmei Chagiga Olos Re'iyah Yom Rishon. The reasoning that not all Yidden are able to have time to bring the Shalmei Chagiga Olos Re'iyah on the first day on Shavuos, on Atzeres itself, is Dorish Biru. That also needs to be explained in of itself. Why should we accept that they don't have a chance? As them korban Pesach, but the korban Pesach was euch in them korban is jeder eine gewen mechuyev. The korban Pesach, everybody was mechuyev. Hom alle Yidden gekent makre sein in ein Tag. All Yidden were able to bring it in one day. Und noch mehr, der korban Pesach, the korban Pesach had even more limitations. You couldn't bring it. You could only bring it in the afternoon. Und noch mehr, der korban Pesach hat man bei Erev Pesach gekent makre sein nur achar chatzos hayom. You can only bring it after midday. So you didn't have a full day in Erev Pesach. Beis ad the Olos Re'iyah v'Shalmei Chagiga hat man gekent makre sein a ganzen Tag. The Olos Re'iyah Shalmei Chagiga, you could have a full day to bring them. From noch dem Tomit Shel Shachar. As soon as Tomit Shel Shachar, you have to wait for the Tomit Shel Shachar, the morning Tomit, and then you can bring it. So you have more time even than a Pesach. You're going to say, Pesach, they can all bring it because they brought it in partnership. But the same thing is true for Olos Re'iyah Shalmei Chagiga. You can also bring it in partnership. So you're going to say that the korban Pesach, not everybody bought. Pias the korban Pesach. Hat nicht jeder Yochid gebracht, not every individual brought. But rather you counted and you made groups. So, and therefore, not everybody had to bring it. That's why they could bring it. Is doch der din as euch Olos Re'iyah v'Shalmei Chagiga can be bringing b'shutfos. But the law halacha is that also the Olos Re'iyah and the Shalmei Chagiga can bring a partnership. So not everybody had to bring it separately. So why should we say they couldn't do it? So the logic itself, the Rebbe challenges why the Alter Rebbe doesn't bring down the svara of the Rid. But so we come back to the question. The question come back to its place. Was is the moker v'hasbora if them was the Alter Rebbe zok? What is the source and what is the explanation? And that the Alter Rebbe says, Kivan shebedover ze osu Beis Hillel k'divrei. Since in this matter Beis Hillel did like the words of Beis Shammai, and many of the Jewish people conducted themselves like Beis Shammai to bring it after Yom Tov. Mitzadem tam from Beis Shammai, they followed the Fisheim Shum Tzorich Eichel Nefesh, because it doesn't have no need for Eichel Nefesh, so they follow Beis Shammai. What is the source for this, and what's the logic for this, as the Rebbe will continue to explain? The Rebbe now is going to ask a few more questions, which are going to also point to what the Alter Rebbe really meant over here, because the actual language is a little bit difficult to understand what the Alter Rebbe is saying over here. Gimel. Euch beguf divrei Admur Hazok and darf man verstehen. Also in the body of the words of the Alter Rebbe, we need to understand. The first question that we were discussing by what's his source. But then we need to explain some of the reading inside the Alter Rebbe, and this will actually give us a clue of really what the Alter Rebbe is saying. Number one, Nogdem vi zokt, after the Alter Rebbe says, Kivon shebedover zeh, osu Beis Hillel kidivreim, that since in this matter of bringing the korbanos not on Shavuos but on Yom Tavo'ach, on the day after, that is Beis Hillel did like the words of Beis Shammai, from Beis Shammai, like their words. Vos is moisif? Why is he adding? V'harbe mi Yisrael nogu k'moisim, and many of the Yidden conducted themselves. Why? V'bald as nit nor Beis Shammai, nor euch Beis Hillel, habun makriv given b'yom shalach Yom Tov, since not only Beis Shammai, but also Beis Hillel offered on the day that is after Yom Tov. So is Pshita, then it's obvious that that became the only option as alle Yidden sich also geführt, that all Yidden conducted themselves euch. Everybody did so. Alle haben sich geführt. Why would it even be a question? Why does he have to add? If Beis Hillel agrees to Beis Shammai, they did the same way. Of course, everybody did so. Why does he have to add? And many of them did like that as well. And euch, in addition, what is the exact language? Was ist der Loshen Harbe? What is it? Many did, nit kol Yisrael, not all. Why many did so? This points that there is something there. And base number two, the Alter Rebbe from the Arichas Divrei Admor Hazokim B'Haschola Sasif, from the lengthy words of the Alter Rebbe in the beginning of the Sif. He brings down Lefi Shehoyo Yom Tavo'ach Bizman Shebeis Hamikdash Kayim, because it was a day of offering, of shechting, of korbanos in the time the Beis Hamikdash was in existence. That day they would bring the Olos Re'iyah that they weren't able to bring on Yom Tov itself. There was nothing there for the person that for his needs, so you couldn't do it on Yom Tov. And you cannot therefore desecrate Yom Tov in order to shechta because there is nothing for the person. Because you can bring it after Yom Tov. Okay, if the Torah would say that you have to bring the Olos Re'iyah only on Yom Tov, okay, that wouldn't be desecrating. That would be the command of the Torah. But here you can bring it afterwards. So therefore, because Shavuos you can make up for 7 days, just like by Pesach and Sukkot, you have 7 days to bring it. And therefore, you're not allowed to be Machal Yom Tov. So the Alter Rebbe brings down the entire explanation of the Baal Shem Tov, of Beis Shammai. Is mashma, so it appears as those was bedover zeh also Beis Hillel kidivreim. This that the Beis Hillel did like from Beis Shammai, v'harbim Yisrael nogu k'meisum, and many did like them, is verbunden mit dem Tam from Beis Shammai, that this is connected to the reasoning of Beis Shammai. Was bringt up freer, that he brings down, okay, now like you said before, he brings down that whole reason. If it's for something else, why is he bringing down the whole reason? So it seems that this is also because of that reason. That man verstehen, so we need to understand, was is the hasbara bazeh? So what's the explanation? Why would all of a sudden Beis Hillel go along with Beis Shammai, v'balda as divrei Beis Hillel is mutar lakriv and b'yom tov? Since according to Beis Hillel it's permissible to offer them on Yom Tov, so why did Taka Beis Hillel follow Beis Shammai? It almost seems that he gives you the reason is that Beis Hillel wanted to be stringent, like Beis Shammai was. There's some problem of bringing in the korban on Yom Tov, etc. But that's not the case because according to Beis Hillel, there is no problem. So what is really going on over here? Ois Dalet. The Rebbe will now ask another question by asking the order, the way the Alter Rebbe brings down these seifim, the three halachas in the end of the Shulchan Aruch. It doesn't seem that it follows the chronological order. And why did the Alter Rebbe place it that way? And that will give us a clue to resolve what the Alter Rebbe is saying. So let's look inside Dalit. But Yuvan Zeh Hagdim will understand this by introducing a biur in dem Seder HaSeifim from the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch B'Seif Halochas Anal. We'll understand it by first introducing the explanation. We'll explain the order of the Alter Rebbe's section, the paragraphs of the Alter Rebbe in the Shulchan Aruch in the end of these halachas. Frier kommt der Sif Yudches. First comes section 18. What does section 18 speak about? It says, Osur lis anis tainis cholim b'chag Hashavuos. It is prohibited to fast a tainis cholim, which is for special dreams. Sometimes when you have certain dreams, you have to fast. But on Shavuos, on Atzeres Shavuos, you're not allowed to fast. That's the section 18. Then the Noch, their Sifyutes, and then comes the section 19. It says that the Motzoyi Chag Hashavuos Osur lis anes Meker Hadin, that after Shavuos it is prohibited to fast from the halacha. This is the din that we were talking about the whole time now in this Sicha, that it is prohibited even from the halacha itself. And then comes Sichos, comes section 20. The Noyegim b'medinas elu, that the custom in our countries now is shaloi lis anis, not to fast, v'shaloi loymar tachnun, and not to say tachnun, Mirish Chodesh, starting from Rosh Chodesh Sivan, at Chesboy, v'ad Nechlal, until the 8th day, 2 days of Shavuos and the 8th day. And then we actually do it until even to 12, but in the Shulchan Aruch he brings down from Rosh Chodesh until the 8th day. Well, the Siddur he adds also to Yud Beis Bay till the 12th day. But in any event, the Rebbe is going to ask now, what is this order? So, the Lechoira. Sie ist movon farvos de Alter Rebbe hod di dinim wegen Isur Taines v'chulu, these halachas about not fasting, the Sif Yudches and Yutes and Chov, he placed them at the end, some Soifen Hilchos Chag HaShavuos, to the end of the laws of Shavuos, warum I swore senes, because logic dictates, as frier darf kommen die dinim hogim chiyuviyim was medarfton, that first we should discuss, we need to have those halachas and traditions that are positive ones that you should be doing b'chag Hashavuos. Und danach, then the inyonim v'dinim was eine verbunden mit Isurim v'kiyutzveh. And then these matters and halachas which are tied to prohibitions and similar what you're not supposed to do. So we understand that, but the question is the chronological order of the seifim over here. The last sif talks about starting over Rosh Chodesh. Why does that come at the end? The shaila is over b'negeya dem seder the drei sifim gufa. The question is about the order in these three sections, 18, 19, and 20 themselves. Mitzad seder hazmanim, if you go by the order of times chronologically, Wohl doch gewinn Masim, it would be fitting, as the Alter Rebbe so zum allem ersten oneben mitten letzten. See, first he should have started with the last section, section 20. It should say V'noigim, what he has now in section 20. He should have started with that. V'noigim medinus elu shaloilis anus v'shaloilim ertachnon. The custom in these countries is not to fast and not to say tachnun mirish chodesh ad chesboi, starting Rosh Chodesh till the 8th. That's chronological, starts with Rosh Chodesh. Und dann noch the Dinner wegen Isur Tainis Cholim Chag Hashavuos, then about not fasting, the prohibition on Shavuos, which is 19 section, that one, Ubemotzoi Chag Hashavuos, and that you're not allowed to do on after Shavuos, which is the next sif. Ubefrat, especially, so why did the Alter Rebbe place this din of the custom of not to say Tachano, starting with Rosh Chodesh at the end? Ubefrat, especially the Rebbe says the question is even stronger, especially as the din ein Emrim Tachnon steht in the Ramo. Ein Emrim Tachnon is stated in the Ramo, so that's a very clear halach in the Ramo. Un ein misanin in Mogen Avrom, and the fact that you don't fast, that's that you're not allowed to fast on Shavuos. That says right in the Mogen Avrom. So these are very clear. The references that it's a Ramot, it's a Mogen Avrom, and yet Mashenkin this Isur Lisanis Tanis Cholim B'Chag Shavuos, which the Alter Rebbe begins with, the section 18, not to fast the Tanis Cholim B'Chag Shavuos, wird nicht gebracht in Ramo. That's not brought down in the Ramo, nor in Chok Yaakov b'Shem HaMaril. The Chok Yaakov, the name Maril, brings down about not fasting at Tanis Cholim and Chag Shavuos. So even as far as importance, first should come the minhag of not saying Tachnun, which is Adin in Ramo. And the second halacha, which ain't Tanis Cholim b'Chag Shavuos, that follows. And that's only based in Chok Yaakov in the name of Maril. So it's not as a clear public source as the Ramah. Why did the Alter Rebbe change it? So the Rebbe wants to point there is Yesh Dvarim B'Goy. This means something. There is something here from which we can learn. Ois Hey. The Rebbe brings now to explain this. First of all, he brings an evidence from a Gemara that it was not common, even after the Gemara clearly states, the Gemara in Beitza states that the halacha is like Beis Hillel, it's always like Beis Hillel, that you could bring a korban oila on Yom Tov, and also you could be soimech on smicha on Yom Tov, which Beis Shammai disagrees also. But yet it seemed clearly that this wasn't something normal practice. How so? Let's see in the Gemara. The Bir b'chose. Hey, those for the Alter Rebbe zogt as Beis Hillel osu kidivreim. Beis Hillel did as Beis Shammai. That they did kidivreim for Beis Shammai. Is yesh loimar as the mocker derfun is b'mesechta beitza. We can say the source for this is in Tractate Beitza. What does the Gemara relate over there? Maise behillel hazokin. There was a story. The elder Hillel. Shehevi oilose la'azore lismech aleho b'yom tov. He brought his oila, and of course, an oila is totally on the mizbeach, but he brought it to the azora to lean on it on Yom Tov. And so the students of the elders Shammai that were there, they started challenging Hillel Hazok. Amrullah, they said to him, Mativa shel behemazu. What is the behema? What kind of behema is this? If you are bringing a korban oila, it has to be a male. If you're bringing a shlomim, then it could be a female. So they asked him, what kind of a behema is this? In other words, are you going to go against Beis Shammai and you're going to you're doing smicha on the animal on Yom Tov when Beis Shammai doesn't allow it? So Omar Lahem, Rashi says because of ways of peace, he changed the fact. He says Nekevahi, it's a female. It's not a male. Ulezivche shlomim heve siho. I brought it to make a shlomim. He changed the fact that he didn't want to make a machlokes over there. So the Gemara says, there was a lot of students of Beis Shammai. So Govro Yodom Shel Beis Shammai, the Beis Shammai's academy, the students of Beis Shammai, they overpowered. There was more of them, and that day they were like taking charge, and they wanted to make a ruling like Beis Shammai, make a number account and make it. The halach should be like Beis Shammai. Like you're not allowed to do smicha and shchita eilus on Yom Tov. The Gemara said there was an elderly mitalmid Shammai Azokin from this students of Shammai Azokin. One of the students there, his name was Baba Bebutuk. The Gemara says, "Shahoya yedeya shahalocha ki Beis Hillel." He knew that halacha was like Beis Hillel, notwithstanding that they were trying to change it now. Visholach, and then he ended up ascending. He brought in all animals, and he said everybody who wants should come and do smicha. So he turned it around. V'oisa hayoim, says the Gemara, Govra Yodon shel Beis Hillel. The hand of Beis Hillel ended up overpowering the kovu halacha kemeisam, and they established halachas like Hillel. There was nobody there to challenge this at all, and therefore the halacha remained like the Beis Hillel. Okay, so that was the story that happened at one time, and they established. So then the Gemara says further, the Gemara brings down, Shuv Ma'ase Betalmid Echad. There was again a story. Now this story takes place after already they established the halacha like Beis Hillel. Rashi says after the previous, this was already after that. What do we see? What happened over here? Betalmidei Beis Hillel, Shehevi Olos Re'iyah. He brought his oila to the courtyard. Lismich Allah. He was going to do smicha like Beis Hillel. You can bring the korban, you can do smicha. But so then one of the students of Beis Shammai found him, saw him. What are you doing? Why are you doing smicha? Beis Shammai said no. He was a student of Beis Shammai. He was saying to the student of Beis Hillel. So Amalei, he answered him in a way, Mazushtike, what does it mean to be quiet? In other words, be quiet. He asked me, why are you doing smicha? Why don't you be quiet? Shoska bin Ezifa v'holachlei. So he silenced him by yelling at him or pushing him away, and he left. Simply, this goes on the student. We'll see, the Rebbe will discuss it, who exactly did this. We'll see soon. But the point here is, if they ruled like Beis Hillel, why does the Gemara begin Maise beTalmud Echad? It happened with a student, but this was, why is it a special occasion and they had a discussion over there, but this should have been the tradition by everybody. Vibald as kovu halacha kemoisim Beis Hillel, since they established halacha. It's like Beis Hillel, as me bring the oilers and misemech aleim, that you could bring the oilers three and you can lean on them. Is wir kommt es as laacher is so how come after this is given a meise betalmid echon betalmid Beis Hillel happened the story one of the student Beis Hillel shehevi Olos Re'iyah he brought the Olos and he had this confrontation with one of the students of Beis Shammai. Was weiß that shows das is given nita given lachem. This wasn't an ordinary thing for people to bring their oil there. But an oisgetel ter fall b'talmidechot. This was an exceptional case. One student that happened to it. But azoyim doch gedacht on alle talmidei Beis Hillel. This is what should have been done. All students of Beis Hillel should have done that. Ubechlal in general, not only Beis Hillel students, God's Klal Yisrael, all of the Jewish people community. Warum kavu halacha ke Beis Hillel? Because the halacha was set up like Beis Hillel. So why is it a story with one Talmud? Is the fun gufa muchach? So from this itself is evidence. As euch noch dem bikovu halacha ke Beis Hillel, that even after they said the halacha Beis Hillel, haben Reuv Eden, the majority of Eden, koilel tamid Beis Hillel, including the students of Beis Hillel, are gefirt nicht zu bringen Elos beyontiv. That did not to bring the Elos beyontiv. That's why the Gemara relates to this, the story that was an exceptional case, and that's why he challenged them, and that's why he said what he said. And but that shows that the tradition became for everybody to push off and not to bring the Olos Re'iyah on Yom Tov itself. However, but we need to explain this. But it does go for time, boy. But itself needs a reasoning. So what's the explanation? Since they established halacha like Beis Hillel, if avosom ze nit gebracht, they lost them beyond kediver Beis Hillel. Why didn't they bring their oil like Beis Hillel? Ubefrat, especially as the halacha wegen bringen Olos Re'iyah beyond this halacha to bring the Olos beyond that you should bring it. It's not just you have a choice, either one. No, lechatchila, the mitzvah is to bring it on Yom Tov itself. Is it bloß a heter zu makriv sein Olos Re'iyah beyond? It's not just an allowance, a heter to bring the korbanos, the Olos Re'iyah on Yom Tov. Nor damot is ikir mitzvah. So that's the main mitzvah is on Yom Tov itself, as Rashi says in Chag. Therefore, learn that Alter Rebbe. That's the way the Alter Rebbe learns. As the Maisa now in Gemara Beitzo, but the story in Gemara Beitzo is Behesem Midem, was the Gemara that zählt in Chagiga. That the story here, that with one student fits what the Gemara relates in Chagiga, as Rabbi Tarfon hat nicht gelost, maspit sein dem Tag was noch Shavuos. He said that he's not allowed to do that on the day that's after Shavuos, because it says Valsis a Yom Tavo'ach, it's a day of offering. Toshus Reed said they used to actually dig, but he says, no, this is a Yom Tavo'ach. Das heißt, das was not nit makriv given Olos Re'iyah b'Yom Tov atzmo. The reason why they did not offer the Olos Re'iyah Yom Tov itself is weil azoi hat man sich gefirt b'shayches zu atzeres. This is the way, especially by Yom Tov of Shavuos, there was a special conduct that it was a Yom Tavo'ach, even according to Beis Hillel, Chag Hashavuos. Was damals is given Yom Tavo'ach noch Shavuos, then is when Yom Tavo'ach after Shavuos. So there was the tradition not to do it on Yom Tov, but to do it after Shavuos, because it's the Yom Tavo'ach. Und von dem ist Nistayev geworden b'Chag Pesach und b'Chag Sukkos. And then from this, it already branched out. Once it was established by Shavuos, especially, as the Rebbe will explain, that to push it off, so it branched out already that also in the other Yom Tov, Pesach and Sukkot, as not nit medayi given lahakri b'Yom Tov Rishon, that they weren't particular to do it a Yom Tov Rishon because of Shavuos. The main thing that Rebbe is going to explain now, that Shavuos has a special reason why we pushed it off till the day of after Yom Tov, and it's a Yom Tavo'ach, and that's what Rabbi Tarfon said over there, that you should not do it because it's a Yom Tavo'ach. The Rebbe explains. That's Borobazah. What is it about Shavuos that we push it off? Meikir hadin halten take Beis Hillel. Actually, from the halacha itself, Beis Hillel are of the view as Olos Re'iyah is zmano, that the Olos is their time, and Iker mitzvos, the main mitzvah, in talk for Yom Tov Gufa on the day of the Yom Tov. We learn it also from Pasuk, as we learn from the Pasuk of Chagoisum Oisum Chag lachem. You should celebrate it, a festival of Hashem, called the Hashem. Everything of Hashem, Olos Re'iyah is Chag lachem. You bring it on Yom Tov. Und zu lieben Tame, what's the reason, Take, why do we bring it Hashem? Your table that you're eating is full, you're celebrating Yom Tov, and the table of your master, of Hashem, your teacher, is empty. There's no korbanos. No, bring the Olos Re'iyah. So that's the halacha, main halacha, which applies really to all Yom Tov. Oberbat Seres. But when it comes to Shavuos, was hakul moedim ba'ad seres. Lachem, everybody agrees that when it comes to Shavuos, we need also lachem, because with the other Yom Tovim, you can either spend the time for Hashem davening and learning, or you meal. But Shavuos, we need lachem to show that we're besimcha from giving the Torah. Everybody says there needs to be lachem. Sheyismach boy v'meichelu v'mishta. You need to meichelu mishta, that you should rejoice with food and with drink. Haben sich Beis Hillel gefiert mit Kidvei Rebbe Shammai. So Beis Hillel conducted themselves like the worship in Shammai. Und haben dann nicht makriv gewesen der Olos Re'iyah, and then they did not bring the Olos Re'iyah on Shavuos itself. Vata. What's the reason? Afalpi as mitzad der svara. Although for the logic that we quoted, your table shouldn't be full, and the table of your teacher Hashem should be empty. So that means there's a little bit of a need for you. You're not allowed to do shaloi l'tzorech, but this is a tzorech kitzas. In hakrova soilicity, you have to bring it yontif. It's not eichel nefesh, but there's a little bit of a need, because we don't want your table of the master should be empty. In hakrova soilicity yontif, ubemele is dos bechlal simchas yontif. So then, that's part of the joy of yontif, because you don't want it. You're not going to feel good if you're eating and the mizbeach is empty. Aber Mitzad dem goy del ha'inyan from Yom Shenitna by Torah Shabbat said is the great matter that it's a day that the Torah was given, which is on Shavuos. Was fordert sheyismach boy b'meichel mishta laharis shenoyach mekubul Yom zel Yisrael Shenitna Torah boy. That requires on Yom Tov Shabbat Seres to be rejoicing, eating and drinking, to show that it's very acceptable, you're very comfortable for this day that the Torah was given. So we want to party and show that this is okay, that this is very acceptable, that we love that. Beis Hillel sich mishtadel given. So therefore, Beis Hillel made the effort as the ikre korbanos b'yom zeh, the main offerings on that day. So sein nor this was in zeh, nor should only be those was in zeh is nit nor kitzas tzedach nor tzedach gomor. They should see visibly not only a small need, which is the Olos Re'iyah, but a real need, a complete need. A simcha b'meichel b'mishta, eating and drinking. They wanted on Shavuos to have a part of the korbanos that is actually the happiness that can be celebrated. That they wanted to concentrate that. Yes, you could, you're allowed to, but still they wanted to single out that's Matan Torah, time for Matan Torah, that you're so happy and rejoicing. He said, all the korbanos today are going to be the korbanos that there is a tzorich for, that you fully need to eat it, that you can use it today on Shavuos. Oizai. Apia now is move on. So based on the above, it's understood that the Alter Rebbe, number one, bringt barichas betchilas hasif den tam from Beis Shammai. Understand why he brings down the beginning of the sif with the whole explanation. Shelo yeho yichayim lakrib yom tov atzmei lefisheim b'hem shum tzorich el nefesh. He brings down the whole reason because there's no eichel nefesh. Although it doesn't fit the opinion of Beis Hillel, so why does it bring it down? Base, we also understand that Mont Nor Olos Re'iyah doesn't mention Mitvin Toisvus Serid, Val Derech Zein Levush. Toisvin Levush, who has been der Mont Shalmei Chagiga, that were brought, the Rebbe doesn't bring it down. Gimel is Moisiv Harbe Mi Yisrael Nogu Kamoisum Lakrim Achar Yom Tov. These are the 3 points that he said that many of the Yidden conducted to bring after Yom Tov. These are the 3 differences in the Alter Rebbe than the other commentators. First, the Alter Rebbe brings the whole reason of Beis Shammai here. He doesn't mention, number 2, he doesn't mention that on the Yom Tavo'ach they brought the Chagiga also in addition to the Olos Re'iyah. And he writes the word Harbem Yisrael Nogu Kamesim. But then is that Alter Rebbe Madgish, the Alter Rebbe emphasized as Choch L'das Beis Hillel is mutter lakriv am Yom Tov, even though that according to Beis Hillel is permitted to bring a Yom Tov, is aber osu ki divreihem. They did as Beis Shammai. Unitzu lidem, not they did like Beis Shammai because of what Beis Shammai's halacha. Nitzu lidem was lo yispiku lahakriv Olos Re'iyah v'shalmei chagiga b'yom tov atzmai. Not because they didn't have a chance, like other mitzad chumra shechmiru as atzmam kedas Beis Shammai, or maybe they just wanted to be stringent, like the opinion of Beis Shammai megifin mokom achar. We find elsewhere that sometimes we say that they were in Gemara and Shabbos that they wanted to be stringent on themselves. No, that's not the reason. Nor mitzad them tam from Beis Shammai. The reason that they didn't want is she'ein bohem shum tzorich oichel nefesh, because there is no need for the person. That's why they were chumra. They didn't want on Shavuos to be makriv things that don't have oichel nefesh. The far harbe mi Yisrael nogu kamoisam lakriv machayotiv, and that's why many of the Yidden did like them to bring out the Yom Tov to show and to be celebrating only with the inyonim of oichel nefesh, which is a lachem, which the person is fully oichel nefesh. So that's not just the opposite, not because they didn't have a chance, not because they want a chumrah. Alter Rebbe is the reason is because of the Beis Shammai's reason. But even though that would not be the halacha according to Beis Hillel, but on Shavuos they wanted to do like Beis Shammai because they wanted to show that on Shavuos they're only going to eat things tzorich gomur nefesh because the celebration is on Pesach is noyach and mekubal and that's why many of the Yidden did like that. Und der Alter Rebbe ist das noch mehr matt in the meat. He spices this up, makes it even more tasty. Was stellt die Isur benegei Isur tainis nicht für Seiner's Mano. That he places these halachas and the prohibition of the fast not in the order of time. Shumar Chodesh ad Chesboi. So you should have first, the Rebbe said, don't fast. You should have first brought down from Rosh Chodesh till the 8th day when we don't say Tachna, we don't fast. Then Nogdem Isur Tainis Chola b'Shvuos, and then comes the Shavuos that comes after the first from Rosh Chodesh. Ulacher ze Isur Tainis Motzoi Chag HaShavuos, and then not to fast Chag HaShavuos after Shavuos. The chronological order would have been that way. Norerzok der Minek Shaloi Lisanis Mirosh Chodesh Vad Chesboi. This minute not to fast for Rosh Chodesh, nor dem Isur Hatanis b'Chag HaShavuos u'Motzei Chag HaShavuos. After he says first you can't fast on Shavuos, Motzei Chag HaShavuos, then he says you can't also not the minute not to fast from before Shavuos. Why? But they lahadgish in order to emphasize. And those was their Isur Tainis b'Motzei Chag HaShavuos. That the prohibition of the fast on Motzei Chag HaShavuos kommt noch dem Siv wegen Isur Tanis Cholim b'Shvuos. It comes after the Isur Tanis Cholim b'Shvuos. Is nicht nor mitzad dem Seder Hazmanim that in the order first comes Shavuos, then comes Motzei Shavuos. Nor behemshech letoichnoi from Friedrich Siv. This follows the contents of the previous Siv. That's why this follows that. The mit was osur the sinus tinus cholim b'chag Shavuos. The Alter Rebbe quotes first the halacha in Sif Yud Ches that you're not allowed to, the 18, section 18, that you're not allowed to fast on Shavuos. If you shu yom shenitnu boy ha-Torah, it was a day that the Torah was given, but tzarich lechel v'lismoyach boy, and you need to eat and be rejoicing. Laharis, to show off that it's comfortable and it's acceptable to the Yidden that the day they actually gives the Torah. It's not. It's the same like all Yom Tov Shabbos in which it's permissible a tainis cholim on other Yom Tov and Shabbos you're allowed, but not on Shavuos. This introduction of Sif Yud Ches explains Sif Yud Tes. Section 18 explains 19. Is Musbar, that's what we understand was Motzei Chag HaShavuos, also Lisanes Mikradin. That's why we can't fast from the halacha itself because of what we just learned in Sif Yud Ches. In the time of the Beis Hamikdash, it was a day of shechting, the Hainu. They would bring the Olos then. The Alter Rebbe is mevayer gleich dem tam from Beis Shammai. He adds and he tells that there is no Beis Shammai. Aber nicht bringen die gleich as das sagen Beis Shammai. He doesn't say Beis Shammai say. He brings this reason as if this is the reason for everybody. Worum der Geder is euch Leut Beis Hillel. This is also, according to Beis Hillel, that has value to it. It's not an Isur. We said Beis Hillel because so you're allowed to. However, it still applies. Beis Hillel conceptually goes along with that, and that's why the Alter Rebbe brings it plain. Not only as words of Beis Shammai, it's also Beis Hillel. Everybody agrees to that, and that's why later on the halacha is that Beis Hillel doesn't want you to do that on Shavuos because of the Noach Mekubal. We're only going to bring korbanos that are visibly there to make our Yom Tov a more party and things that we can eat. Apizeh, the Rebbe has to brag another verse. Apizeh, Yom Tov, the Loshen for the mountain of Rebbe, we also sweetness the language. It says, Harbe mi Yisrael, nogu k'meisa. Many of the Yidden conducted like that. L'chayre, the Baldas Bedovers are also Beis Hillel Kedivreim. Since Lepoil Mamish, they did Beis Hillel like Beis Shammai, is doch L'chayre Kol Yisrael haben sich azoi gedacht, haben sich azoi geführt. All the Yidden conducted themselves such. Warum? So what's the reason? Though is nit negeya, those was the Yidden sich azoi geführt bepoil. It's not important to hear that they actually did. It's not about what they actually did. We like them Tosfos read, like Tosfos read said, well, they all pushed it off. Nor their tam. Here it's important the reasoning. Wie tochen, as bei anderen von sie, is das gewend der Fall. By others, maybe it was the reason, was bei sehr gefällt Zrizus. Okay, they were lacking, they weren't quick to do it, nor the Raye is from them was harbe al kolponim nogu kemoisim lakrim after Yom Tov, because many did, they accepted it as a custom to do it after Yom Tov. Mipnei dem tam shebedover, because the reason hashayich liyom shnitna by Torah canal, which is connected to the day that the Torah was given. We want to emphasize that the reason for doing this is because of it's a day that the Torah was given, and that's why they didn't do it. And they didn't do the Olos Re'iyah then. It's not because they didn't do it. Maybe they didn't want to do it for others. We don't want to say that because they ended up doing it. We want to say that many did it because they accepted this idea of Beis Shammai's idea that Beis Hillel accepts that on Shavuos we shouldn't do this in order to all the korbanos should be those korbanos that are completely l'tzorech gomer. And now the Rebbe is going to explain that according to the Alter Rebbe's explanation, the day after Yom Tov became actually as part of the Yom Tov. According to the Tosfos read, okay, they couldn't do it on the first day, they did it the second day. Couldn't do it on Yom Tov, they did it the next day. But the Alter Rebbe says they didn't want all the korbanos that you can't use fully to be brought on Shavuos itself, because it needs to be a noyach to have full korbanos that you can eat. So part of the korbanos was the chatchila set aside for the next day. It made it into Yom Tov. That's why we don't say Tachanun today. Let's look inside. The proof is actually from the story of Rabbi Tarfon from the Gemara. Ches. The Ashleimer, as the Alter Rebbe learned to Saruis, the Alter Rebbe learns this idea that it's all because of Noach in the order that I've explained in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. It's all based upon the special Shavuos needs to be a day which is showing that you're enjoying the food and the meal because we're accepting the Torah. That's the order, and that explains the halacha why Beis Shammai, that why Beis Hillel did like Beis Shammai, is proof from the story in the Gemara. The Alter Rebbe learned das Arois euch von der Breise Rabbi Tarfon Gufe. Also from that Breise itself. What it says there is Leinichum Rabbi Tarfon L'Soivdoi. When they started to being maspid this Alexa over there, so it says Rabbi Tarfon did not allow them to eulogize. Why? Mipnei sheyom tov shel atzeres hoyim. It was Shavuos. The Gemara asked right away a question. The Gemara fragt, Yom Tov sal kadaitoch? They're thinking that this was Yom Tov. Ibi Yom Tov mika osi. Who would they then come to eulogize? They don't need Rabbi Tarfon to tell them that you can't. It wasn't on Yom Tov itself, Yom Tavo'ach. Bring the Rebbe, how did it make such a mistake in the in the Braise L'chatchila to think that, why does it say in the Braise Yom Tov Shel Atzeres when it's not really, it's Yom Tavo'ach? Wie kommt es als die Gemorre Braise? How come the Gemorre in the Braise so L'chatchila so im Mishana sein dem Loschen? Why would it change Loschen zu sagen Yom Tov Shel Atzeres anstatt Yom Tavo'ach? Yeah, he fixed it, but why did they to begin with say Yom Tov Shel Atzeres? Why didn't it say Yom Tavo'ach? Nor von dem is verstandig, so from this we understand, das ist der Teuchen von dem ersten Loschen. This is when it says that it was Yom Tov Shel Atzeres, so you also means Yom Tavo'ach. It didn't mean Atzeres, but Atzeres as it's the next day. Das ist von dem ersten Loschen. Das ist nicht Yom HaAtzeres Atzma. It's not the day of Shavuos Atzeres itself. No, Achrei Atzeres. It's a day after. Aber li'ita choten in sich an Iker von Yom Tov Shel Atzeres. It has a main part of the Yom Tov Shel Atzeres. Zeindig the Yom Tavo'ach from the korbanos Yom Tov Shel Atzeres. Being that it is the day of the shechting of the korbanos, so the Yom Tov Shel Atzeres are brought on that day. This is the Alter Rebbe versus the Tosfos Rid. Loit and Pirush from Tosfos Rid, but according to the interpretation of Tosfos Rid, is the Yom Tavo'ach von Atzeres nicht Iker korbanos shel Yom Tov shel Atzeres. The Yom Tavo'ach from Atzeres that followed when you brought the korbanos, that's not the Iker korbanos shel Yom Tov shel Atzeres, not the main Atzeres. Nor blois a hemshech. It's a continuation. If you didn't bring them, nor by a tel, only by song. Those who didn't have a chance. But there is no inherent something in the day that follows, because there's no problem with the bringing in the first day. If they didn't get a chance, but it doesn't transfer the day, the korbanos of Yom Tov into the next day. Only if you didn't have a child, but poil, you did it then. So that doesn't fit so much. The Gemara high time is nicht glatik. It's also not smooth. Was if them tog is how the nomen gather for Yom Tavo'ach. Why we call this a Yom Tavo'ach? It's not a day of Tavo'ach. It's a day of the people who didn't have a chance. Bizados is a zoy oich bisman hazeh. To the extent we call it a Yom Tavo'ach, that even nowadays, lachem achurban, after the destruction, that means the makriv korbanos, when we don't bring korbanos, it's still a Yom Tavo'ach. The day was never a Yom Tavo'ach. It was a day for those who didn't get a chance to, who brought it then. We bowed as that a Yom Gufa is not Yom Tavo'ach. The day is not a Yom Tavo'ach. It was Bepoil Mamish brought then, but it's not a day of Tavo'ach. She's not al derech v'isru Chag. She's similar to Isru Chag, B'Lshoin Rishalmi. Berei de Moyado. It's a son of the Yom Tov. Ben HaMoyed, a son of Yom Tov. Asat Tuldo unatitzoe fun I choiles lahakriv kol hakabonos b'chag ha'atzmai. It's because it's a result and a consequence that you cannot bring the korbanos and the Yom Tov itself. You bring it then, but it's not the Yom Tov. The Yom Tov is not. The Yom Tov was on the day of Atzeres. As opposed to the interpretation of the Alter Rebbe. Hayois as Atzeres is Yom Shenitna Boy HaTorah, v'tzorich lachem v'lismayach boy. Since Yom Tov is the day that Torah was given, we need to be rejoicing, eating and rejoicing on Yom Tov. V'lochein hat man atil korbanos von Atzeres makriv given in Hayoim. Therefore, part of the korbanos of Yom Tov, we brought them in a day, velcher, which according to the Alter Rebbe's language, also Beis Hillel k'divrayim v'harbem Yisrael nogu k'moisom. They did it in such a day in which, as the Rebbe the Alter Rebbe says, that Beis Hillel did like Beis Shammai, many did like them to do it on the next day. Nasa lahem yom zeh. So then, since this was based on the reason to divide up the korbanos, some of them on Atzeres and some of them the next day, then the day Yom Zeh Shu Moitzu Yom Tov K'mo Yom Tov Atzmi, that became like the Yom Tov itself. Hachiyuv Mamish from the korbanos is the Yom Tavo'ach. The actual obligation of the korbanos is the Yom Tavo'ach, to bring now the korbanos, because the Olos Re'iyah became the day on the next day. When the far werter also behesed v'tainus, that's why it's prohibited to eulogize on a fast day. Let them is move on, and according to this we understand, as in Kain afaton. So now, if so, now, B'shachora Beis Hamikdash, when the Beis Hamikdash has been destroyed, Lahutro ha'hesped v'atainus b'y b'yoyim. The eulogy and the fasting in that day, the day itself, has not been permitted. Hayos, as the tog nase k'moyichulu k'moyom tov atzvik, and how the day was made as a Yom Tov itself, like we said before. So therefore, it's also B'tainus today. It's the day. It's a part of the Yom Tov of Atzeres, and that's why in the Gemara and by Rabbi Tarfon they made the mistake. They said it. Why would the Yom Tavo'ach be? It all points to the fact that it has a kedusha of the Yom itself, and that's because of, for Shavuos we need to bring on Shavuos itself. Those who need tzedek gomur, because to show that nira mekubal, and the other part was set aside for the Yom Tavo'ach, for the day after Yom Tov. Oistes. Apikol anal kuntuis, based on all of the above, it turns out, as the chilik zwischen dem Alten Rebbe mit dem Tosfos Rid is in zwei Protim. The difference between the Alter Rebbe's view and the Tosfos Rid is in two details. Aleph, number one, Yom Tavo'ach is verbunden mit dem Yom Tov von Atzeres Gufa als Yom Shenitna bei HaTorah. This Yom Tavo'ach that follows is tied with the day of Atzeres itself. It's a day that the Torah was given, and therefore the Yom Tavo'ach takes the other korbanos. Beis. It's not because we had no choice. You couldn't bring it on Atzeres. Says that the Eden are not able to enough. There's not enough time to bring. Nor sees the day was made up because of the doing and the custom of the Eden. Also, Beis Hillel kidivreim. The Yidden, the Beis Hillel did like V'harba mi Yisrael Nogu Kamesam, and they did like them to honor Shavuos by bringing the Olos Re'iyah on the next day. On the far Nasalem Yom Zek Mo Yom Tov Atzma. This day itself became like Yom Tov. Yom Tov. So there's the two details that the Rebbe brings down over here. Is one, that the Yom Tavo'ach is a day which is associated with Shavuos itself, not just when they didn't have it, make another day. I know, I mean, it's not just like any other day when they brought the korbanos, but it's a Yom Tavo'ach, it's a day, because that day was established. And number two, it was established because that's what they wanted. It was intentional. It didn't just happen. And these two protim that Rebbe is going to explain, these two details are tied to one another because they're inner meaning. In Torah is faran der inyan from Matan Torah, v'dos is mitzad neisna Torah Kodesh Baruch. In Torah we have one aspect that Torah was given, that the Eibishter gave us the Torah. And then we have Kabbalah Torah, that we received the Torah. V'dos is mitzad ha'makabel b'nei Yisrael, as it is from the receiver. That's by the Yidden. Und das sagt der Alter Rebbe b'Shulchan. This is what the Alter Rebbe says in the Shulchan Aruch. Atos vos akoil moedim ba'atzeres ba'ina nami lachem. Why does everybody agree on Shavuos that we need lachem? We need to have the celebration and the food for the person. Is das laharis shenoich mukubel Yisrael yom shnitna b'Torah? That is to show that is comfortable and acceptable to you in the day that the Torah, the day that Torah was given. Das heißt, auf Zaros bringen dem Geder ham Torah vidos is mitzad hamakabel mitzad Yidden. That is to bring out, to express the definition of Torah from the perspective of the recipient, the Yidden. We're happy, we're rejoicing. Und darüber kommt das azoyarois benegeye dem yom vos mis makriv the korbanos from Chag Hashavuos, and therefore it comes out that way in the day in which you bring the korbanos of Shavuos, Yom Tavo'ach. We call it Yom Tavo'ach as der chalois shem Yom Tavo'ach of dem Tog. That why is it on the day? Is nit mitzad hechrich. It's not they were forced into it. Was loy hispiku lahakriv the korbanos b'yom Chag Hashavuos. They didn't have a chance to bring Hashavuos. U'memela verdos brei demoide becomes a son, a secondary, a son of the holiday. No, a tetzov Yom Tov, a result of Yom Tov. Nor mitzad hanhogas Yisrael kinal, but this is because of the conduct. Also, they made it into a day. As mitzad zeir hanhoga, in their simcha v'yekir Torah, because of their conduct, the joy and the special, the deer of Torah, lahadish noich v'kul Yisrael, to show that they're comfortable, it's acceptable. Hamze oivgeton, they accomplished u'meisiv given oich in zman. So they accomplished also in time. They added time. As much as Yom Tov, that even the day after Yom Tov is Nasa Lam Yom Zeh K'ma Yom Tov Atzma. This day becomes to them as Yom Tov itself. So these are the two details that, first of all, it's the day that was given to them, and they did it on their own. And they on their own added the second day, not just as a son of the Moyed, but this is actually accomplished that made it into Yom Tov itself. They changed it around. This is Sichos Yom Beis Chag Hashavuos, Tavshin Tezayin, and Tavshin Chav Gimel, and Tavshin Lamed Vav.